my foundation and my refuge and my deliverer.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, our one true God. Greetings, everybody. Today, among other things, we're going to talk about the old believers. And you notice how I make my cross. Yes, and we're going to talk about the old believers. Okay, about the old believers. Here we have a situation. In 1652, in the Russian church, Patriarch Nikon, a man of good reputation, became Patriarch of Moscow. There was no bad problems as far as his orthodoxy. He was orthodox. And using common sense, he saw that the Typikon, that is the rubrics, that means the way the church has been operating, and those rules, and that's really, it's a book called the Typikon. It's been copied from Byzantine times over and over again. After all, books deteriorate after 100 years, 200 years, 300, 500 years. You use a book, it loses its vitality, to say the least. So it's copied over and over again. So we keep the Typikon, or you would keep the words. And so this book has been copied, and then when Russia became Orthodox, this Typikon was translated into Russian, into Slavonic. And just like if you have an iconographer who really knows how to paint, but he doesn't have a proper understanding of orthodoxy, and he looks at something from the Latins, oh, that's pretty, so I'm going to make an icon of that. And he makes a mistake. Like what? Oh, the most obvious is to make an icon of, quote-unquote icon, of the Holy Trinity, which is impossible. So you have an iconographer that makes a mistake. Should it be followed? No. Absolutely not. But people say, look what a beautiful icon. It's done in this tradition. And so they don't think right. And same thing happens with a calligrapher. Suppose someone has a beautiful handwriting that he's copying a book from the Greek translation or something, and he sees a mistake, or he makes a mistake. And this mistake is carried on because he copied it. And people look at it and they say, oh boy, this is a beautiful translation or a beautiful copy. A beautiful copy. It must be right. And many times it's not right. There's a mistake. So this is something that happens. It's the natural event in our fallen nature here on earth. We make mistakes. There's no one perfect, only Christ. So things can creep in and cause problems and mistakes. So we have the famous Saint Paisios Velichkovsky. And what did he do? A saint who was not only from Manatos, but from Moldavia, a great saint of the church, who put together the Philokalia. He corrected the mistakes that he found in old manuscripts. Why keep mistakes if you can see that this copyist made a mistake? Why keep it? And our Saint Paisios, of course, he would correct it. And he did correct it. And he's one of our saints in the church. So Patriarch Nikon was doing what is common sense in the tradition. This Patriarch Nikon, he saw the mistakes that were in the Typikon. Maybe he had experience from other churches, the Greek churches, that were not doing things the way the Russian church was doing. So when he became Patriarch, he started to revise and correct the text of the Typikon to bring them closer to the Greek Typikon, to the Byzantine Typikon. And maybe he collaborated with different translations and tried to correct it. This is a good bishop. This is what he should be doing. Why keep something that you know is a mistake? But at that time, in the 1600s, there were a lot of people who, after Byzantium fell, their heads became swelled, and they said, we are the remnant of the Byzantine Empire. We are the remnant of Orthodoxy. So everything that we do is perfect because we haven't fallen. You could see that they have this mentality. And so these people, they saw the Patriarch Nikon was correcting the Typikon. And they said, nope, no, we're not going to accept it. In other words, even though Patriarch Nikon, you are Orthodox, we are going to be disobedient to you. We have no right, of course, in the eyes of the church and the eyes of God, to be disobedient. But we are going to be disobedient because the devil is standing right on our shoulder and whispering in our ears and saying, do not accept the corrections of the Holy Patriarch Nikon. And say, and we'll give you, the devil said, we'll give you lots of excuses. Say that, well, we have Saint Sergius of Rodonez. He used these books that were not corrected, and he became a saint. Therefore, we're justified. And saying, we are going to be disobedient. And the answer is, no, you are not justified. Patriarch Nikon is an Orthodox bishop. You have no right to be disobedient to an Orthodox bishop. Is there any time that you can be disobedient to an Orthodox bishop? And the answer is yes. The canon tells you. The canons of the church tell you. If the bishop preaches another faith, if he becomes a heretic, like we have today, God have mercy, well, everybody's become an ecumenist heretic. Yes, if that happens, you can be, in fact, you have to be disobedient because that's what the canon tells us to do. It says, flee from that bishop, flee from that patriarch, because he's not a bishop, he's not a patriarch anymore because he espouses a heresy. He is a wolf. Was that what it says? A wolf. Flee from him as you are fleeing from a wolf. But people don't want to obey the rules. Then maybe people don't ever hear the rules because the wolf is not teaching the people the faith. So that's the only reason you can be disobedient to a bishop. As long as he is Orthodox, you should be obedient. And of course, There's other small things, moral problems that can cause a bishop a problem. But that the church has mechanisms to correct something like that. But if the person is Orthodox, he's a bishop, you are bound to be obedient. But now these people, they rebelled against the Patriarch. And these Russian people are saying, since Constantinople fell in 1453, we are the perfectly right Orthodox Christians, and our books, even though they are infested with so many mistakes, we are going to keep those books and follow those books. And if our Patriarch wants to correct them, we are going to judge him. We are going to place ourselves over him, like Judas placed himself over Christ. Right? I'm going to judge our Patriarch and be a Judas. And we are going to cause a schism. We are going to break away. So how many broke away? 1,000? And you could just tell that people are going to say, they're going to whisper and proclaim, and they have people who think like Matthew. Matthewite. He's exciting. He's causing agitation. Matthew of the old calendars in Greece. He's causing agitation among everybody that he could talk to. So in Russia, they're saying, we are going to separate from the Patriarchate, from the Russian Church. We're not going to be obedient. Follow us so we could keep the faith. Oh boy, they say that we could keep the faith. And so how many followed? Probably 500,000 to 1 million people. So this was a great problem in Russia. And so you had the authorities. Peter I, Catherine, had to deal with these millions of people who were separating themselves from the church and causing division. Everything should be peaceful in the empire, the Russian Empire. Everybody should be obedient. But no, not these old believers. And so they are called Raskolniks, schismatics, which St. John Chrysostom says is worse than being a heretic. Because they keep openly, you go into everything looks like it's perfectly orthodox, but they cut themselves off from the church. And so what happened with these people? Okay, they were persecuted. Well, the Russians, it's their own country. Don't you think that they have a right to discipline? I want to use the word discipline, because it's disciplining their own people. It's not like people out here in the West, in Europe, where if you go on a rampage and kill so many people, you're apprehended. You weren't killed, but you're apprehended, you're still living. So they will give you a trial, you'll be found guilty, and you go to prison, and you'll have a cell, and you'll have 3 square meals, and you'll have a TV, and you will go out and exercise, and you will live your life in prison. That's how they do it. There's no death penalty for causing death. But in Russia, not so. In Byzantium, not so. In Orthodox countries, not so. If you killed someone, if you murdered someone, and you are guilty, you're going to be punished. You're going to be, well, look what happened. Yes, you're going to be punished. Look what happened. This terrorists, incited by the Jews, went in and they killed, 150 people at a concert. They apprehended, how many were there? 4, and all those that connected with them. They apprehended them. They confessed, yes, we were going to give money. We were going to have money for going in and shooting up all these innocent people and burning this theater down. So they were punished immediately. And when they came to the courthouse, they weren't standing upright. They were bound with their hands behind them and bowed down. And when you saw their faces, you could immediately see that they were punished for their audacity. Well, in Russia, that's what they do. Well, hundreds of years ago, you could bet your boots they did the same thing. So the Russians disciplined their own people. So you call it persecuted. Those persecuted like to say that they were persecuted. But some could say we disciplined them to wake them up. And quite frankly, they weren't killed. They were disciplined. Maybe the government police went a little bit too far and some lost their lives. But by and large, if you have a few that lost their lives, that means 1 million people weren't killed. So to say that they were persecuted is a stretch. The Russian church did not persecute them. And the civil authorities disciplined them. Orthodoxy doesn't persecute anybody. If you want to become a schismatic, if you want to become a heretic, you're off on your own. You leave the church. The church is not going to go after you and persecute you like the Muslims and say, well, you left the church, you have to die. No. God is not pleased in such things like this. And so these people went off, and 1 million of them, the first group, which were a little bit more, they were like spoiled brats. They said, we will just have our tradition like it was before Nikon. We will bless ourselves this way. We're going to bless ourselves this way. If Nikon tells us to bless ourselves this way, like the rest of the Orthodox Church, we will say no. But if you will accept us so that we could have our tradition of blessing ourselves this way, with 2 fingers up, we will unite with you. So, this first group is called Edinovertsi. They are described as unionists. They rejected the forms of Patriarch Nikon. All his reforms, they reject them. And further rejected Peter I's Western innovations. These are now secular things. Peter I, he wanted everybody to shave. He wanted everybody to dress like in Europe. These are not things of the faith. It's a corruption without a doubt. Every man should have some hair on his face so he doesn't look like a woman. A man is a man. God gave a man hair. If God gave a man hair for his face, why should someone cut it and look like a woman, like Caesar, like the Pope? Orthodox Christians don't do that. And so the pious Orthodox Christians, the Greeks, the Russians, at least they have a beard, a mustache. Some of them have a beard. So, in the 19th century, the Russian church had pity on these poor people who said that we would rejoin the Russian church. Just let us keep our traditions before Nikon changed. And the Russians had pity on them, and they said, these poor people, they're they went off so far. Let's do whatever we can to unite them back to the church. And so they permitted them to be in union with the Russian church, and so they made their cross this way. At least they're part of the church. The church always has faithful who are not perfect in their, sometimes the way they think, or sometimes the way they practice. Okay, so then this major group, they living their lives thinking that they're keeping the faith, but then they lose any bishops, they lose any clergy, because they die off. And they have no clergy because they separated from the church. So they are called, another group is called Bezpopovcy. That means the priestless group of old believers. They reject Nikon's, Patriarch Nikon reforms, but maintain some semblance of what the church believes in. They have no bishops, and thus they were unable to create clergy for their schismatic group. As a result, they came to believe that there is no need for clergy. What? And in some ways, their movement resembled the Protestant and Reformation. So they said, okay, we have a lot of people. We have no clergy. So let's say we don't have need of clergy. We could do everything that the Orthodox Church provides. We could have our own mysteries and do them by lay people. And so this Protestant-minded group, the priestless ones, did they continue? No, it's a schism. So what happens to a schism? They fight among themselves. They argue. They break up, just like the Matthewites. And they form their own church this way, their own church that way. And so how many groups came from them? 7. 7 groups from the priestless old believers. What does that show? That shows that they're not part of the church. Now, the third major group of these old believers is called Popovcy. And they, the priesthood rite, more akin to the Matthewites, and they believe in the reception of priests from the official church by laymen. How can a layman receive a priest? Doesn't happen. But if you're a schismatic, you'll find a way to justify yourself in doing something that's not proper. So they want a priesthood. So we only have laymen, but now we found this priest, and he's coming from the official church. And perhaps he was not a good person, so they deposed him, but how can we receive him so he could be our priest? So if you're a schismatic, you say, okay, we will anoint him with chrism that we have when we were part of the church. And that's what they did. And these priests, for the most part, had grievances with their own hierarch. They were disobedient. And under the pretext of the faith, they took up the parishes of the old believers, the old ritualists. This group preserved the outward semblance of the Orthodox Church, becoming the primary source of the repentant old believers returning to the Russian Church. So these people, after hundreds of years, and started their own priesthood, what a ridiculous thing. They were more inclined to join the Russian Church, but they were schismatics. Now what happened with this group? They fought among themselves just like the previous group. They argued, and they split into 5 different groups. So, this is the story of Raskolniks. This is the story of the old believers. They had no right, no blessing from anybody. Certainly not from Christ, not from the gospel, not from the canons, not from holy tradition. They had, but only from the devil. Yes. To be disobedient people, which brings death. And sad, but they caused so much grief among so many people in Russia. And they exist today. There's groups of them in the United States, Canada, Europe. They still want to hold on to their disobedience. But now they are in the midst of the worldwide heresy of ecumenism. How do you think these so-called perfectionists are dealing with the worldwide heresy of ecumenism? They're falling in line just like everybody else. So, this is the fruit of disobedience. No one ever should have any association with the old believers, the old ritualists. Okay, suppose they keep something proper. Suppose they have proper icons, but they are schismatics, or even now heretics. Just because they keep one little part of the holy tradition better than all the rest, is that a reason to join them? And of course the answer is no. Suppose the old believers keep some other tradition, such as their ascetic practice. But it's very rarely that they have this because they've deviated. These old believers have different practices. They have a prayer rug, just like the Muslims. They act to the extreme. If you make a prostration, you have to put your hands on the prayer rug, and you have to bow your head and touch your head to the floor. You have to do that. Who says? The old believers say. Suppose you don't go all the way. That's not a prostration. They say no. So they have this crazy ideas, and they have traditions, I should say, and crazy tradition of some groups have, you have to have your own special clothing. Clothing, fancy clothing. What, when you pray, if you don't have your special clothing on, God doesn't hear you? And you have to have your own special utensils for eating. Yes, you heard me right. You have to have a spoon. You can't have a fork, because that's not in the tradition of old believers. So they have these extremist ideas that you have to eat with a spoon. If you eat with a fork, you're not Orthodox. And other things. And there are other traditions that have crept in, like things that are bizarre, that they are permitted to do. These are all things that they're not worthy to be repeated, because it's somewhat shameless. So they permit themselves to do things, and they call it their tradition. So if you shave a little bit of your beard, that means you're not Orthodox to them. How is that possible? What kind of mentality is that? But that's the world we live in. Okay. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God the Father and communion of the Holy Spirit be with you all.